All right, let us begin with the word of prayer. Blessed Lord, you have caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning. Grant that we may in such wise hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by patience and comfort of your holy word we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, which you have given in our Savior Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All right. So today is going to be our last day of Daniel. And then not next week, but the week after, when I am back, we'll talk about the return from the Babylonian captivity. You're welcome. So we're still in Babylon today. And we will look at everybody's favorite story, Daniel in the lion's den. Before we do that, and the other thing that we'll do before that, is there anything that you thought about or wondered about when it came to the sermon on Sunday about Jesus and children?
It was very good.
Oh, good.
Even the children, and it was a great sermon.
It was a pleasure to preach. Yes, Trish.
Actually, from 2 weeks ago,
Okay.
Zachary had a question.
Mm-hmm.
In the hymnal, on the responsive readings, it has P for pastor, C for congregation, and every once in a while it has an A. What does the A stand for?
That's a good question. The A stands for assistant.
For what?
Assistant.
Assistant. Okay.
There are some parts of the liturgy where, like if we had a vicar, a non-ordained person can lead those parts of the liturgy. So, because there's certain things that pastors have to do by virtue of their call in their office, like the absolution, the consecration, and things. But you can have an assistant, like for the prayers and things like that. So, yeah, that is why. Good eye.
Like even a layman?
There's an A. What's that?
Even a layman then?
Yes, even the layman. Yeah.
No, another thing I want, when people make the sign of the cross, some go this way and some go that way. Which is the right way?
Well, it's not in the Bible, so you can do either way you want. Generally speaking, historically, Lutherans have gone right to left. That seems to be the more ancient way of doing it. Roman Catholics do left to right. So, and that, I think they decided on that later. So when the Lutherans knew that, they decided they were going to stick with right to left. So, I mean, the Greek Orthodox, they also do right to left. It doesn't matter, but the thing that I always point out to people is you want to do right to left so you don't chicken wing it. See, so if you do right to left, you end like that. If you do left to right, got chicken wing. So. Right, yeah, and there's different explanations that, of course, obviously it makes the shape of a cross, but it's kind of grown in like the actual meanings and things. And sometimes that's one thing, that Christ is in wherever my heart is, and things like that. But when I bless people, I bless left to right, because when people receive the blessing, it's a mirror image, right to left. So, yes. We got liturgical questions today. Anybody else or anything sermon related about two best things in life, Jesus and children? So I'm known for my subtlety at times. So yes, Caitlin is pregnant. If you didn't pick that up, she is pregnant. Yes. Okay. So thank you. Yes, due April the 17th.
That's my husband's birthday.
Oh, good. Well, if it's a boy, we'll name him Richard. Yeah, mercifully, and I thank God for this, after Easter, after Lent, after Holy Week, because Easter is very early, this March the 31st. So there'll be 10 foot of snow, while we're celebrating the resurrection. But yes. So my mom was born April the 20th. She's not holding out any hope because Caitlin has either been early or right on time, because Macrina was born on her due date, Gloria was born the day before, and Thomas was only slightly early. So doesn't have high hopes. But she shared a birthday with her mother and her mother's twin. So when my grandma was starting to feel it, she had her doctor appointment that day. The doctor said, you cannot go home. And she said, I am going home. It is April the 19th. I will come back tomorrow, and my daughter will be born on my birthday. And doggone it, that's exactly how it worked. So we can hope, April the 20th. But, all right. So anything about the sermon, the content of it? All right. Very good. In that case, so where we stopped last time, we finished with Daniel chapter 3. That was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. We are going to skip chapter 4, but you really should read chapter 4 sometime for yourself, because it's about the fate of Nebuchadnezzar. The good news is that by the end of it all, Nebuchadnezzar praises God and says that he's the Most High, and he truly is, the king over all the heavens and the earth. However, sometimes people walk a crooked path, and Nebuchadnezzar, fresh from his, revelation, that the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is real and will save them and preserve them, it doesn't say what he does with the statue. I assume he melts it down or something. But then Nebuchadnezzar, like a lot of great and powerful people, he falls victim to his own pride. And he does this after he's had another vision. And the vision that he has in Daniel 4 is this vision of this great tree that has all these long branches. The animals nest under the tree and the birds nest in the branches and bears fruit. Magnificent tree. Well, the tree gets cut down. So he calls Daniel and he says, so what's the dream about? And Daniel says, I hope it's about your enemies. Because what it means is that the great and mighty are cut down. And if you're prideful, this will happen to you. And that seems to go in one ear and out the other for Nebuchadnezzar. And at some point, a little while later, he's strolling through his kingdom, and maybe he's looking at his hanging gardens or something like that. And he talks about, the great glory and the power that he possesses, that he would be king of Babylon. So God strikes him for, it says, a period of 7 times. So maybe that's 7 years. And Nebuchadnezzar, his hair grows long like the feathers of an eagle, and his nails grow long like the talons of an animal. And he goes on all fours, and he eats grass like the ox, and he is wet with the dew of heaven.
That was all in 4?
That's all in 4, yes. Great story. And God says, you'll be like this until you learn how to acknowledge me. However long that takes, eventually Nebuchadnezzar gets the point, and he's restored to acting like a human being. And the last we hear about Nebuchadnezzar is that he thanks and praises God. So hopefully we'll meet King Nebuchadnezzar one day.
Was he ruler all that time then?
He was never deposed. And there are some of the historical record is a little spotty. But in fact, Nebuchadnezzar, he rules the longest out of any of the Babylonian kings. He rules for over 40 years. So maybe they were so afraid. They're like, if he does that to him, maybe we shouldn't mess with Nebuchadnezzar. So that's the end of Nebuchadnezzar. So that's chapter 4, which again, make a good movie, I think. But chapter 5, where we're going to look today, we're going to see the fall of Babylon. So regardless of Nebuchadnezzar's foibles and his sins, it doesn't cost him the kingdom. But God has kind of fired a warning shot, for the kingdom of Babylon. And finally, that comes to pass with what we're going to talk about first. That's Daniel chapter 5. This, by the way, is the origin of the expression, the handwriting is on the wall. It's usually not a good thing, but it's not a good thing for Belshazzar. All right, so Daniel 5. So having given you that background, we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit. So the reign of Nebuchadnezzar is over. There is a king between Nebuchadnezzar And this fellow, which they never said in Sunday school, so I don't know how to pronounce it, Nabonidus? We'll go with that. So there's Nebuchadnezzar, and then I think his name was Amel Marduk, and then Nabonidus. Now, what we're going to see is the text of Daniel says that the king is named Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the son of Nabonidus. He is not technically the king. And we've talked about this before, that a lot of times the Bible is not technical in some of its language. So, what is the Pharaoh? We would call him the king. But they're like, no, he's the Pharaoh. It's like, okay, the head guy is the king. Just like when we did Jonah, who is the head guy in Nineveh? They're just like, the king, I guess. So it's that sense. Okay, Belshazzar is the crown prince. All right, he is the heir to the Babylonian throne, but he is not the king. His father is still the king. And what it is exactly that happens to Nabonidus is not clear, because when you look at the history of Babylon outside of the Bible, here it's kind of spotty. What seems to be clear is that his father was exiled. And whether that was his decision or it was self-imposed or whatever, or, he was not removed from the throne. He is still the king of Babylon, but he's not there. He does come back, and actually I gave you the dates. His reign is 556 to 539 BC. 539 is a very significant year, because that is when Cyrus the Great, who's Persian, conquers the Babylonian Empire. So Nabonidus is technically, officially, he is the last king of Babylon. But he's not here right now. And so it's his son Belshazzar who is acting as the king, because he's the crown prince. The other thing that's not clear is we don't know that much about Nabonidus. He does not seem to be related to Nebuchadnezzar by blood. So the reasonable assumption is that he married Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. So that's all we know. So, but Belshazzar, crown prince. So he's like the Prince Harry of the situation, I guess, right? God save the king. Maybe there are other parallels, but I don't know.
Mine is that she's not the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, what does it say? What's their theory?
The wife of Nebuchadnezzar, but not the daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, down in the bottom.
Okay, yeah, because it's not clear, and one of the things that they don't have for Nabonidus is they don't have any genealogy. So, if that's the case, it's not certain. Why is he the next in succession? If he himself is not the son of Nebuchadnezzar. So it could be too, because they will call Nebuchadnezzar Belshazzar's father. And again, they're not being strictly literal with that, like the founding fathers, right? Nobody's dad here is George Washington that I know of. So does that mean that Nebuchadnezzar is his grandfather, or is just his predecessor? Is really not clear. So that's about all we know. But if they are related, then it probably would not be through his father, is the thing. So
This one says he is called the son of Nebuchadnezzar, but the Aramaic term could also mean grandson or descendant or even successor.
Right, exactly. Yep. So you're not going to want to be him, whatever he is. But so we'll look at that. So by the way, his name does mean, I gave you that in your notes. You can see the Bel part. That's Baal, because one of the chief gods in Babylon was Baal, and usually he goes by the name Marduk, but his name means Bel, protect the king. All right. And actually the Babylonian name that Daniel has was Belteshazzar, which is also a derivative of the name of their god.
I wondered about that.
So,
I read it earlier, where it said Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Yeah. And then over here, I thought, is it the same name? And I had to go back and look and realize there's only like a letter or two.
Yeah, that t is the only difference. Yes. Yeah. So both Babylonian names, interestingly, tradition, and it's just tradition, but Belshazzar is also one of the names of the Magi that come to see Christ. And I've often toyed with the idea that the Magi were descended from these Magi, who would have had a little bit of knowledge of the God of Israel and Daniel's prophecies, and maybe that was part of the reason why their descendants went looking for the King of the Jews, because they were astrologers. They read the stars, they see this weird star up here, and they're like, well, maybe Daniel was right, and then they go to find the Christ. My own opinion. But, all right, well, how about we look at this? Chapter 5. Would somebody read for us first 4 verses of Daniel 5?
King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, and that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone.
Okay. Now you see what I mean. You don't want to be Belshazzar. Once again, sometimes stupidity is invincible. Especially when you know what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. And Belshazzar knew him, In his lifetime, he might be part of his family. He's heir to the throne. So they have a feast. And it seems between the time of verse 1 and verse 2, Belshazzar is what we say, very drunk. Because, people, I know none of y'all know anything about this, and you shouldn't, because it's a sin. But people have some of their greatest ideas, when they have had too much alcohol to drink. And he's like, wouldn't it be a good idea if we took all of the vessels, the gold and the silver and the sacred stuff that Nebuchadnezzar plundered out of the Jews' temple, and we can put our wine in the cups, and then we can just get more drunk. That I know of, Nebuchadnezzar is never, he's not chastened for being a conqueror and a plunderer. God didn't seem to ever get angry at him about that. I mean, that was kind of God's plan, that his people would be disciplined and the temple would be destroyed. However, you might recall, and we've talked about before, when it comes to things that are sacred to God, God's principle was the same principle that your mom or your great aunt used to live by. That is, you don't touch my stuff. Okay? You don't touch my knickknacks. You don't touch my curio. Okay, God does not like you touching his stuff. And we've seen that before. The most famous example we saw back in the days of King David, when David was having the ark moved. And he was not doing it the way that the liturgy said to do it, which was a red flag. The Levites were supposed to put the poles in, carry the ark, and the people are supposed to keep their distance. David had the ark put on the back of an ox cart. So, rumbling around, and then when the ark starts to tip, that was when Uzzah, trying to do the right thing, let me put it back up. Well, you're not supposed to touch the ark of God. Okay, it houses his presence. And so Uzzah falls down dead. David is kind of mad at God, and he tells him so. And God says, I said don't touch my stuff. Okay? So, if that happened, you probably should not take the sacred vessels that they stole from the temple and, put your Cabernet or whatever it is that you like in it and start drinking it.
You never mentioned that they drank the water.
Yeah, they might have nasty water, you never know. It's like, St. Paul wrote to Timothy. He said, have a little wine to soothe thy stomach. And, it's not bad advice in moderation. But there's something else I was going to say. Now, I wouldn't test God on this, He might strike you dead, if you use something sacred for a profane purpose. But just a little thing about holiness. because we believe in the Holy Christian Church. We have Holy Communion. Things are holy. Things can be holy. Holy is simply to be set apart for a special purpose. And so you and I are holy when we're baptized into Christ and we become part of the church. And holy does not mean morally perfect or sinless. It simply means that God has designated this for this specific purpose. And the way that I've illustrated it in confirmation before is because they struggle, and people outside of the church struggle with this. They're like, oh, you think you're holy? I'm like, well, actually I am. Like God says I am, like He washed away my sins. He says that I'm holy. That's what I am. I've been regenerated, I have a completely different kind of life than you do. So they struggle with that, because they hear holier than thou or something like that. And I said, well, think about this. And they get this without finishing confirmation. They have this sense. I said, what would you think if somebody took, like, after we're done with church, took the host, our communion bread, and ground it up and just threw it to the birds? What would you think about that? And they all look at me like, huh? I'm like, yeah, see, you have some sense of the holy. It has one purpose. It's consecrated to be Jesus' body, it's eaten, and that's it. I said, what if somebody took the baptismal font and made it into a bird bath? They're like, huh? I'm like, yes, exactly. So there are things that are holy. God does not want you to touch His stuff, okay? He wants you to use it for the purposes that He's given it to us. So Belshazzar, that's the principle, okay? He took the communion cup and he decided he's going to use it at his dinner party, all right? He's violating the holy. Anything about that? I mean, it's also why we talk a certain way, behave a certain way, and conduct ourselves in a certain way in church. Because what we're doing in church is completely different than anything else, in all existence. That this is the one place, it's the one time that is only devoted to the worship of God and to receive the things of God that make us holy, right? So I think that if you go to a church that doesn't look like this is something set apart from everything else in life, this is also, that's the ox cart principle. It's like, doesn't look like church, and that's not you being judgmental, that's you saying, I have a sense of the holy, and this doesn't seem holy, right? If it looks like a TED Talk, it looks like entertainment, it's not holy. So, don't want to give birds baths in the baptismal font. So, all right. Anyway, do you have anything about that you want to talk about? Okay. I did read, it's been several years ago now. I forget, it was a European country. I can't remember where. No, I think it was Britain, actually. It was Britain. A lot of these great cathedrals and churches are now basically museums. They don't have people to go there.
Yeah, when I was in Germany at Fulda, which is a German Catholic town full of Catholic churches, not one of them was open.
No.
That you could go in and look at, and no, not one of them. Because we went around hoping to do that,
Yeah.
the same thing. And,
Yeah. Yeah, although the Germans, they still take off all the church holidays.
we did go
Ascension
to a
Day,
German
it's like,
mass.
oh, time to have a beer. You went where?
To a German mass.
Did you? Okay.
Oh yeah, because there was a big cathedral right across from our hotel, and so we had to go Sunday to a German mass. The girls, the men didn't, of course, but
Boo.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad
It
you
was
went.
interesting. There was some familiar things,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
a few songs and some of the liturgy. I, of course, didn't understand it in German, but I understood it in English.
Yeah,
It was
which is
basic.
also the power of the liturgy, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah.
That you're like, I do understand what's going on, even if I don't know what they're saying. How about that?
Yeah, they didn't.
But yeah, so this was in Britain. So you tour the cathedrals, and whoever had written the article had said, it's a small trend, but it's a growing trend in Britain, that we have these young people who have no connection to the church. They might have been christened or something, like in keeping up appearances, but they go in here and they're in awe of the architecture, and they're like, what is this about? Because they've never been in a building that's like a church. And the more thoughtful people go, what was it in this person's worldview and belief system that led them to create a space like this? And it's had this kind of effect where some of these folks have started to go to a church where there are living people in it, and some become Christians. And it's simply because they took a tour and they looked at the architecture, and they looked at this Gothic or Romanesque architecture of this building. And they're like, there is something to, like, that beauty tells me there's something true about it, which is not usually how we think of people, coming to faith in Christ. But that's why those things are important.
When you read about the ark and stuff, all the things that he said, like the carvings and the ornamentation and everything, I mean, it's so over the top.
Yeah.
And even like when there was something that he was at, like a dressing, I mean, robes had to be a certain, I mean, much more than, and when I was growing up, it was kind of like you had to wear a certain thing, you had,
Yeah.
And of course that's gone now, but.
Yeah, it's elaborate and excessive in the detail. And the amazing thing is those things don't serve any function. It's just God simply likes beauty. And so it's a good thing to beautify, our sanctuaries and our worship and stuff.
I was gonna say, when I was a little kid going to Sunday school, living in Detroit, we went on, I'm sure it was more than one day of a field trip. We would go visit other churches, other types of churches.
Mhm.
And like, I have cousins that go to different type, they have different beliefs and everything, and I've gone to their weddings and everything. But coming back home to our church here, I just have a greater appreciation, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
But I remember when I was a little kid thinking, how did they consider this a church? It never seemed like what I was used to.
Mhm.
Kind of neat. Oh, I mean, it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that is neat.
But anyway.
Jeff Kinney, who's in hospice, I remember one time he said to me, and Jeff is a very thoughtful guy. He said, I've always loved the sanctuary at St. Luke. And I said, oh, well, why? And he said, with that ceiling, it's a small space, but it has kind of the feeling, that it's a lot bigger. He said, I think of St. Luke as the smallest cathedral in the world. And I really like that. And the reason we have the buildings and the things, because brick and mortar is important, is because it's supposed to raise our minds, to realities like that. So, I'm saying too much. Let's continue with the smallest cathedral. Every time I go in there, I say the smallest cathedral, because it's such a grand place. When God comes to His people, and eternity invades time and space, and we go into heaven with Christ, and that's why it's the smallest cathedral in the world. So, an upside down. Yes, yeah, yes, boat. The way the traditional design of a lot of churches was the ceiling was supposed to look like the hull of a ship, because the Christian church is an ark. Through baptism, the bad part of you is gone, and you're saved through the water like Noah. So if the word nave, if you know your church architecture, y'all sit in the nave, the audience part, Nave is a word, it means ship. Because when you're in the church, you're delivered and saved, and you're going through on the ark. So, yes. All right. However, now Belshazzar does like nice things, you see, but he doesn't like God's things, and he worships the thing instead of God himself. Because while they're getting plastered, the last thing we heard in verse 4, they drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So it's kind of a slap in the face, to the God of Israel. Not only are they drinking out of his cups and stuff, but they take the occasion in their revelry to praise their pagan gods. Okay. Would somebody read that next paragraph for us, 5 through 9?
Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his knees knocked together and his legs gave way. The king called out for the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners to be brought, and said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Beelzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. It's kind of humorous. This is the same setup that we've gone through now like 3 times, where king does not fear God. He calls in the magi and the astrologers. Tell me what it means. Oh, I don't know what it means. Well, I guess we need to find somebody, who does know what it means. And again, Belshazzar should know better. He doesn't know better. But never fear, because you're going to see who points him in the right direction is his wife. Yes. All right. As it should be. Verse 10, the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers, because an excellent spirit, and maybe that should be spirit with capital S, knowledge and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. All right, so we have seen that before, right? Nebuchadnezzar and his dreams, Daniel comes. Usually Daniel is the bearer of bad news. And this is a man that obviously does not fear the God of Israel. I should have pointed out. So you see the thing that he promises whoever can interpret the dream, he will be third ruler. Because Nabonidus is still the king, technically. Belshazzar is the crown prince, so that makes you, if you can solve the riddle, that makes you number 3. So we'll get Daniel in there. Anything about that before we go on?
How soon we forget.
Yeah, and that's part of the point, I think. Yeah. Okay, 13. Let's see. I know we've got some words in here. So, I'll let somebody else read. Let's say 13 through 16, please. Okay.
Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I have heard of you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men and enchanters have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation. But they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom.
All right. Then Daniel, who has hobnobbed enough in his life with kings and emperors, says, Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. And then what Daniel does is he recounts what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, which you can read about in the previous chapter. But he says in 16, O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. The Babylonian Empire was the biggest and the greatest empire that had existed, up to this point in the history of the world. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. There was a great picture. I should have printed it for you. I think it was William Blake, who was an artist in the 19th century. His depiction of Nebuchadnezzar crawling around on all fours with his hair and his talons and everything. 22. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. Right? He knew everything that had happened. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you. You and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. But the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. You do kind of see with Belshazzar the snowball effect that we've talked about before. It started with the drunkenness. It went to the profaning God's stuff. And then it went to outright idolatry. So, he shouldn't have done number one, and he wouldn't have got to number three. And he did know better. It's not like he was a worshiper of the true God anyway. He knew everything that happened to Nebuchadnezzar, and it didn't make any difference to him. So, you do have to hand it to Daniel, though, and then we'll see the interpretation of the vision. Daniel does have some fortitude, doesn't he? I mean, first of all, he was, taken prisoner by Nebuchadnezzar. Then he stood up to him the first time with the food. You remember that last time? I don't eat things that are defiled. God took care of him. Gets promoted. Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to kill anyone who can't interpret the dream. So then he's in harm's way then. He tells him what it means. Then comes the fiery furnace. And now, Daniel's like, made it through Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And then Belshazzar's got no fear of God either. Is like, so tell me what this means. And it ain't, not good news. I like Daniel a lot. All right, anything you want to add or ask? Okay, 24. Then from his presence, God's presence, the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed, Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. And I put this on your sheet if this helps you. I mean, it's in the text too, but these are Aramaic words, and you can see them on page 2. I copied it for you. Aramaic, not greatly different from Hebrew, but it's a little different. I mean, they're both Semitic languages. And I should have said last time, Daniel is one of the few books in the Bible that there are significant portions of it that are written in Aramaic. So basically, the story part, chapters 1 through 6, is written in Aramaic, and 7 through 12 is written in Hebrew. I was never good at Hebrew enough to discern the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. But Aramaic was their English. That was the court language for the Babylonians and then the Persians. So we're looking at part of the Old Testament is not Hebrew, it's actually Aramaic. But those are the words. And the first time, they're left untranslated. So Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. 26. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered. Mene means numbered. By the way, they read right to left. So if you're like, which one is Mene? So you got to go all the way over. And that. Because you can see it twice. That's Mene. Right to left. Numbered. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. And mene is repeated. I suppose that's for emphasis. Numbered, numbered. Tekel, you have been weighed. Tekel means to weigh. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting or lacking. Yes, John.
You read right to left. Is the word written right to left?
Yes, the word is written right to left. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. That would be an interesting challenge if you had to read left to right.
Well,
But yeah.
that's what I think it would be. You'd have to be shifting back
Yes,
and forth.
yes. Such a difficult language, I have to say. My mind was a lot more oriented toward the Greek, but it's like kind of like Chinese. There is only one in Hebrew. There's only one word in the entire bloody language that actually has an English derivative, if that's the right word. One word that you actually take the word directly from the Hebrew into the English. It's the word camel. Camel. The word is gamal, so they took gamal from the Hebrew into the English. There is no other word that you're like, there's no English word that comes from Hebrew. And whereas with Greek or Latin, you're like, yeah, you could see it. I mean, you could look at it and be like, yeah, I can see how that, all those Hebrew is like Chinese. It's just like, you got camel, that's about it. And dog is fish in Hebrew, so, backwards, literally backwards. But God saw fit to use it, Guess that's up to him. But, all right, so tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. You've been found lacking. So he, under the judgment of God, he does not measure up. Perez, 28, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So just a linguistic thing. That Perez, is that the singular? Is that what I wrote? Yes. Oh, now I can't tell because my notes are messed up. He says Perez, but it says Parsin on the wall. One is the singular, one is the plural. So I think Perez is the singular, so he's saying that word means divided. But there's a double entendre here. So there's a double meaning. It doesn't just mean divided, but it also is the same. And you can kind of see when you look at Perez. It's Persia. And we encountered a long time ago now. Do you remember Perez? Way back in the book of Genesis? As Genesis 38. Perez was a twin. His mom was Tamar, and his father was Judah. And that's one of the more kind of sordid stories in Genesis where, and I kind of give Tamar a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Her husband died. I think her husband was He died. He had not fulfilled his obligation. That he did not give her a child. So then Tamar had to marry his brother. Remember, that was the Old Testament law. It was levirate marriage. And in some rather lurid detail, it explains how Onan did not fulfill his obligation either. God was so mad at Onan, he struck him dead. So there is nobody to do what needs to be done. The levirate marriage doesn't work out because God killed her husband. And so Judah, her father-in-law, does nothing. So Tamar dresses up as a lady of the night. And Judah, being an upstanding guy, who when he goes on business trips, he doesn't do anything weird, just sees a prostitute on the road and he's like, I'm kind of interested. Not knowing it's his daughter-in-law. Okay. But this is to fulfill the obligations that they had. You're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. So in a way, and Judah even admits this, he says, Tamar is more righteous than I am. Like, I thought you all were about evenly matched, but apparently, Tamar is more righteous. So Tamar has twins. She has Zerah and Perez. Perez, apparently, hard labor. His name means breach. So he has burst forth. He's the breach. See, I mention all that, not to shock you, but because that's the same word. You see that? Perez. The kingdom is breached. The kingdom is going to be divided. So literally, altogether, numbered, weighed, divided, or you could take it as Persia. Because it will be the Persians who, and in fact it will say, spoiler alert, that very night, the very night that he has the interpretation, Darius the Mede comes and Belshazzar is killed. And there's no more Babylonian Empire. It's now the Medo-Persian Empire. So the handwriting is on the wall. The canaries are in the coal mine. That's where that, because the hand appears. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Perez. Any questions about that? There's a recurring theme in Daniel that we've mentioned before, which is that God really does rule over all things. And he stands then in judgment over everybody, the great and the least, definitely over the rulers of the world. And because God is God, he is able to bring up rulers and kingdoms and empires when he wills. He is able to tear them down when he wills. Sometimes he seems more patient than others. I mean, all the boneheaded stuff that Nebuchadnezzar did, and still Nebuchadnezzar comes to his senses while he's out there eating grass, and he repents and he's spared. Belshazzar, who we don't know anything else really about, but he made one big mistake, and God is like, that's the end of your whole empire. So, just something to keep in mind.
Have a straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yeah, the Gamal's back. Yes. And that's the thing. It's really, God is abundantly loving and gracious. The best proof of that is you and me, right? That he would be gracious to us. It is a mystery to us. Why is it that it seems like God is more patient with some people than others? It seems like he does have a limit, right? I mean, that's kind of what the Day of Judgment is all about. We sing in the hymn, which one is that? Is that Wake Awake? The hour of grace is fast retreating. It is a profound mystery why it is that God, who extends his grace to all people, it does seem like he bears with some people more than others. And then when God has come to his decisive moment, that's it. When God acts in his raw power, nobody is going to be able to resist him. So all we say is, thank you, God. I know I don't deserve it. Thank you. That you don't take your word from me, that you're still found in our midst and you're still giving us your life and salvation and pardon. So
Perhaps a father needed the son to teach him a little patience and himself.
Indeed. Indeed. I don't know if Nebuchadnezzar spent that much time with his grandson. It's really unfortunate. Yes. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's reasons for all of these things. So, all right, anybody else? Right. Now, I will say to Belshazzar's credit, I mean, he's kind of caught. He promised all this nice stuff, all the bling and everything, to the guy who interpreted the dream. So, 29, it does not say how he responded. It doesn't say, oh, I repent. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. Whether he thinks that's going to stem God's wrath, I treat the prophet nice. It doesn't say. That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So that was quite the airstrike, wasn't it? One night, everything gone. The king is killed. Crown prince. So this sets us up. I'm sorry, you have anything you want to say?
How he suddenly died or...
Yes,
Sounds like
that's a good
he was
question.
killed.
Yeah. You're right. It does not say
He was killed. didn't
he was killed. Yeah, maybe the wine went bad. It was like in Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade,
It says he was slain.
Okay, he was slain. I think he was probably, but I like the idea of when they go to find the Holy Grail, and the Nazi guy goes with them, and he picks the wrong one. He didn't pick the one that Jesus would have used. And he shrivels, like he's got Nebuchadnezzar hair. I remember he shrivels like into a skeleton and like the best 1980 special effects. Yeah, and the Crusader, whatever his name was, He's like, he chose poorly. That's what happened. I like that. I think that should be in the movie version. But yes, he was slain by Darius the Mede.
Oh, by Darius.
Or under, I guess we could say, because Darius is the leader.
So it's assumed that
Darius takes over.
Yes, yeah. Maybe I shouldn't say more than it says. I imagine he's a military leader. Now, the thing about Darius, that's a good segue. Darius is another person, and certainly this is not true of a lot of these figures, but Darius the Mede is unique, and we don't know anything about him outside of the Bible. So whereas we know a lot of stuff about Nebuchadnezzar and the Assyrians and everything, Darius the Mede, they only know him from the book of Daniel. So Darius is not the top guy, though. He's not the king, if we could use that word. Okay. Cyrus the Great, who's a Persian, he is the leader of all of these forces, and it will be, sometimes it's called the Medo-Persian Empire, but it's the Persian Empire. So Darius is under Cyrus. Cyrus defeats the Babylonians in 539, and so Darius is kind of he's the viceroy. He's kind of like, I guess, the governor over the province of Babylon. So that's really, because there is another Darius, by the way, and we'll encounter him later, but Darius the Great, who's a different guy than Darius the Mede. Medes, so Media is today what you would call northwestern Iran. Persia is Iraq. So that's kind of where these people come from, the Medes and the Persians. All right. So he melted away like wax. Chapter 6. Oh, we're good. Okay. Does anybody else want to read?
I don't mind reading.
Okay, Stuart, thank you. Let's say that first paragraph, first 5 verses.
It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps, is that the right word?
Yep, that's right.
Should give an account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God."
Okay, thank you. So he's got his satraps. Those are kind of like the provincial governors. Throughout the whole kingdom, he's got 3 high officials. Daniel, it's already self-evident. Daniel's a good administrator, so he's grandfathered in there. And Daniel continues to distinguish himself. And the king wants him to be, basically his Darius, right, under him. And this is the cause of the envy and the jealousy and all of those things that don't typically happen, in the political world, but in this case it does. And so now it's interesting what they say, and again, this speaks to Daniel's faith and to his character. What are they going to get him on? Is he skimming off the top? Does he have a mistress? They're like, there's nothing wrong with the guy. But he's devoted to his God. So it has to be something religious, right? So it tells us the kind of person Daniel was. But this is another one of those episodes in the Bible where God's people are persecuted. They are persecuted on account of their faith in Christ. God's people don't give the governing authorities of the world any excuse to come down on them for any other reason. And this is how the Christians routinely defended themselves. When the persecutions really began in the early church, part of their defense was they said, we are better subjects and citizens than non-Christians. Pay our taxes, we abide by the laws, good Samaritans. We actually are charitable, unlike everybody else. So they could not find any fault for them in that. Peter talks about in his first epistle that suffer for the name of Christian, but not for being an evildoer, right? So Daniel is like that. He's clean. They got nothing on the guy. So they have to invent something, so they can get rid of Daniel. Because they don't want him, to be the vice president. All right, verse 6. This is the plan they concoct. Then these high officials and satraps came by agreement, so they colluded, see, there's the collusion, to the king, and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. All right, so for 30 days, we only pray to King Darius. And he's like, sounds good to me. They mention that the law of the Medes and the Persians is irrevocable, cannot be changed. There are no constitutional amendments, and which can put Darius in a tight spot. This also happens later. Another Persian king, Ahasuerus. He is the husband of Queen Esther. We will get to Esther. Esther is a great story. But you remember Esther is it her uncle? Uncle Mordecai? He's in a very similar position. This just repeats in their time in captivity. Mordecai will not bow down to Haman, who is Ahasuerus' little lieutenant or whatever. So Haman devises his plot. He wants all of the Jews in the kingdom to be slaughtered. So Mordecai goes to Esther because she's married to the king and intercedes for the people. And then Esther, has to take her life into her own hands to go before King Ahasuerus and spare the Jewish people. Part of the dilemma, though, is so Haman's plot is exposed, but he has signed an ordinance and an injunction like this one. It cannot be changed. So the order's already gone out. Whenever you see the Jews in our kingdom, you can kill them. So he's in a tight spot. What Ahasuerus has to do is he said, I'm going to put out another edict. So the next one, because he can't take it back. So the next one says, by the way, the Jews may all arm themselves, and they may fight back, and they may slaughter you, your women, your children, and they can take all of your stuff, and there will be no punishment. So everybody else is like, a lot of them got slaughtered, but that was the best that Ahasuerus could do to kind of mop this up. So, cannot be changed. So they've got him. Now, at least it's 30 days, and then it runs out after that. By the way, lions do not naturally live in dens. They live out on the savanna, the grassland, sometimes in the forest. Lions are in a den for one purpose, and that is exactly to throw people down to them. It's a torturous way to die. And I imagine they keep them pretty hungry for when you get tossed into the den. So, they had a lot of kept furnaces around to burn people up, lions dens. So glad we're so much more humane today, right? Yes.
If you needed a big furnace you could fit 4 guys in, out in the middle of the desert, you know, I mean, it's kind of like.
He's just a wicked son of a gun. I don't know. Maybe he needed it, to make the statue, to smelt down. Because that's a big statue, It's like that. I don't know. Yeah, and it was, burned up the guys who threw him in. It's pretty hot oven. Anyway, yes, so lion's den. Verse 10. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Daniel is obviously not in the dark. I mean, if he's number 3, or he's almost, viceroy, he knows what's going on. And his response to that, the first thing he does is to pray, which is an act of defiance, but it's also because he knows that God is the only one who can help him. The most useful thing he could do would be to pray to God. And he goes into his room. You see that his windows are open in the direction of Jerusalem. And that's still the custom today, but the Jews pray facing Jerusalem, wherever Jerusalem might be. And if their tradition says, so wherever you are, you face Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you face the Temple Mount. If you're in the temple, you face the Holy of Holies. Because when Solomon built the temple, that was where God had promised to be for his people, in that forgiving and saving way. And I gave you, way back when, his 1 Kings, when Solomon dedicated the temple. He prayed to God, and listen to the plea of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place, toward the temple. And listen in heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. So Daniel directs his prayer to God. It says that he prays 3 times a day, and that's an ancient order of prayer. The earliest Christian custom was actually that you prayed the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day. At 9 o'clock in the morning, at 12 noon, and at 3 p.m. Remember Good Friday? 9 o'clock, behold the man. Noon, Jesus is crucified. 3 o'clock, he dies. And back in the old country, they would ring, and maybe here too, I don't know. They would ring the church bells. So that if there was church going on and they're praying the Lord's Prayer, you would know. If you were out in the field, getting your potatoes or whatever, you stopped and prayed the Lord's Prayer. Did you? Okay. I love it when churches do that. I've been to some churches before where they go out and they ring the bell during the Lord's Prayer so that anybody, in our geographical parish can know that we're praying the Lord's Prayer. So, but Daniel and the Jews have this cut to pray 3 times a day. So you see what Daniel is doing. Now he's in kind of a desperate situation. He knows it's going to be over for him unless God intervenes. But the other thing, and it's what we've mentioned about Daniel before, is that Daniel did not just come up with this, right? He didn't live all of his life not praying to God. It says this is his custom. This is who Daniel is. This is what he does. And so then when he has that habit and the discipline in his life is structured, by the worship of God. Then when he's in the tough part, he's able to fall back on the comfort that he has, because he knows God. So, by the way, if you know anybody, I can't think of anybody, but you know anybody who raised such a fuss about the COVID thing and not going to church, and they don't go to church right now, you need to smack them, okay? People, denying our constitutional rights. And I'm like, I agree. So you've gone back, right? You're there every week, right? Burns me up. But anyway, habit. Yes. So anyway, his custom. And the custom is meaningful. It's not just a rote thing. But he's even more mindful of the fact now that this thing that has become a part of me, that's formed me all over my life, same old liturgy, same old hymns, same old Bible. Now this is his foundation. This is his consolation and his place of solace, because God is at work in those things.
I'm sure things are different than they are now, because the fact that he went into his upper chamber, how did they know he was praying up there? I mean, that's kind of like an invasion of privacy.
They didn't believe in that either. Well,
how did they know he was up there praying?
I think,
He had open windows.
yes. Well, see, if they know anything about Daniel, they know he's going to do it. I think. The other thing is, we do this weird thing in the modern world that they did not do. They did not pray in their heads. Everything was out loud. And that was true also when they would read. It was St. Ambrose, and that was as late as the 4th century. Ambrose, he was the Bishop of Milan, and he freaked people out because he had this uncanny power to read without talking. They're like, well, that's really weird. So they did everything out loud. They did their praying out loud. They read out loud. So if his voice is carrying, windows open, and they're like, oh, we got him. And they burst in the door, and yeah, he's violated the law. So that could be why.
They were trying to find stuff, so I'm sure they monitored him.
Yeah. They used the NSA, and they tapped his phones and stuff. Housekeeping, and they come in. Oh, what a surprise! He's praying.
They probably set him up. They knew he was going to pray to
Oh, they did.
God.
That was their whole
Checking
thing.
that out,
Yes.
They were stopping it.
Mm-hmm. They were. Yeah, they were. And it does go to show, too, that when it comes to persecution, the thing that we need to be wise about is a lot of times persecution doesn't have much to do with people in government or in society being angry that you're a Christian. They don't care. Like, you believe Jesus raised from the dead, they don't really care about that. The devil cares about that. His minions don't really care about that. The thing that they care about is they don't want there to be any threat to their world and to the state. And that's why they pick on Daniel. They don't care what he believes. They don't care what he privately does. But if they can use it to get rid of him to advance their own ends, then they will do that. So that's the whole thing. Nobody cares in government what you privately believe. They just want it to be private. But if you cause problems, if you have people who begin to believe that there are powers greater than the governing authorities, that means that your allegiance and loyalty at some point is conditional, and that they cannot be put in that place. Because then the state would not be God. So it's just something to... The threshold for persecution cannot be, oh, well, it's not until they line you up against the wall and say, denounce Christ or get shot in the head. That's like a Hollywood persecution, but generally that's not how persecution works. What they want you to do is comply with what they say. And that's why, if it's the religious thing, they'll go after the religious thing. So that's the case with Daniel, too. They don't care what God he worships. Okay, anything about that? All right, let's get to the exciting bit. So they break in on him. Yes, 11. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, was this not your idea? Did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, which is not true. He just is not going to worship him, or the injunction that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. So he tries to finagle it, but the king is only so powerful. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." So there is nothing that he can do, even though he's the king. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, and that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. That's interesting. Put the stone over the mouth and say, "He is not coming out again, is he?" And they seal it, just like,
The tomb.
Pontius Pilate put his seal. This will not be broken, this tomb will not be opened. I don't want to hear any more about this. Said the guy's going to rise from the dead. It's not going to happen. Because it can't be revoked, remember? What the king says cannot be revoked. He puts the royal seal on the stone. Because this is basically his tomb, isn't it? 18. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, no dancing girls, and sleep fled from him. Then, at break of day, at least he feels bad about it, He knows what an asset Daniel is, what a waste it is. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Just like, remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they didn't smell like soot. There wasn't not even a hair on them, was singed. 24, and the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, so as they're falling, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. They were hungry. Okay. Now, Darius, he can't revoke the law, but that doesn't stop him from doing other things, right? So the law is on the books, and now my law for today is that in the den of lions you go, you treacherous people. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end." So you see that theme again that we've talked about? God's kingdom is eternal. God rules over all. The kingdom that he establishes will not be brought down. And then the other thing we've kind of talked about, he delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. For he who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Okay. God rules over all, and also he does rescue and vindicate his people. All of these things have been a test of whoever we've been talking about. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we'll see this all throughout the captivity. So there's a test of their faith. It's also a test of God. And I mean, the simplest way you could put it is if your God is real, he's going to rescue you, right? And that's kind of true. That's what he does in the case of the faithful captives in Babylon. That's what he has to do as a witness for himself. Of course, they won't believe. unless God rescues them. Although, at the same time, their understanding of their faith, in the case of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, is a little shaky, But these are the things that we see throughout the book. Okay, anything about Daniel and the lion's den? All right, so we're done with the book of Daniel, but I think it'd be a shame not to say anything about the next part of it. So we've got the narrative, so our purposes are fulfilled. We've heard like the historical part. The rest of the book of Daniel through the end of the book is the visions that Daniel himself receives. Because up to this point, he's just interpreted the dreams of other people. But God has things to reveal to Daniel. So we kind of continue with this theme of God's dominion and his kingdom. And Daniel gets a look into the king who is to come. So that's part of Daniel 7. There's other things in Daniel. The 70 weeks of Daniel, which has to do with end time stuff, that's in here too. When you get to the end of the book of Daniel, we hear a little bit about Judgment Day and the resurrection. He mentions the archangel Michael. It's one of the only other places in the Bible that Michael is mentioned. So there's a lot of good stuff in Daniel, but the one that I wanted to share with you because I think is germane to our purposes, I've printed it for you on the back page. One of the visions that Daniel has is the one that we mentioned last week of he sees the Ancient of Days, who is God the Father, and he sees the enthronement of the Son of Man. So Daniel says, "As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire." So that's God the Father, the Ancient of Days. "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." So there's the theme of that eternal dominion right there. So we see God, Ancient of Days, and then there comes one like a son of man. Okay. Now you know that that's a title that Jesus applies to himself and that other people apply to him. It's also a title that's given sometimes to the prophets. So if you read Ezekiel, God almost always addresses Ezekiel as Son of Man. So it means a little more. It doesn't mean less than this, but it means a little more than you are a human being. Okay, he is Son of Man. That's part of the marvelous thing about the vision, is that you have God, right? You have the Ancient of Days who is enthroned. And then what he has done is he is sharing his throne with one like a son of man. So God and man are on the throne together, essentially. So Son of Man as a title has that background. He's a man, but it's a title that's been given to the prophets. And then also we know there's something about this one like a son of man who comes that he somehow shares in the glory, the dominion, the power, and the kingdom of God. Which when you know the whole story, you're like, it makes him sound like he's God, don't you think? Because he is, because the Son of Man is the Son of God. But just thinking like the other kings that we've encountered in Daniel up to this point. You've had Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius. Cyrus is kind of mentioned. These are all men who have these aspirations for dominion. And they prance around with titles like the King of Kings, Son of God, things like that. And God is continually, eventually, putting them in their place. And now God is telling them, there will be a King of Kings. There will be a man that I share and I give all my authority, all my power and glory and dominion too. That it belongs to him by right, because he's my son. But that's the picture then of Jesus that we get, the most explicit one that we get in the book of Daniel. And Jesus will reference Daniel chapter 7 to great effect. That's at the bottom of the page. When he's brought before the high priests and the Sanhedrin, he's put on trial. And Jesus, you will recall, remains silent. He's not willing to answer until finally the high priest puts him under oath. In Matthew 26, the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Because they need just enough rope, with which to hang him. Jesus said to him, you have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And that is directly from Daniel chapter 7. You've got the Son of Man, and he's coming on the clouds, exactly the way that he does in Daniel's vision. So that tells you that Son of Man, it means a little more than he's a son of a man. Because he's divine. He's coming on the clouds of heaven. And the Sanhedrin understands exactly what Jesus is saying. Because they tear their robes and they say, he has blasphemed. He has made himself to be equal with God. Because that's the Son of Man is equal with God. So he's saying, I am the guy. I'm the one, from Daniel chapter 7. That he's seated at the right hand of God, coming on the clouds of heaven. So I had to mention that to you because we don't get to look at it for our study that we're doing. So, good stuff. Anything you want to say or ask? Yes, John.
What's interesting about this throne on fiery flames, and its wheels, which I never expect to be on a throne, are burning fire.
Portable chariot.
Yeah, I guess.
And that's also like Ezekiel. Ezekiel is a weird book. But with God, he kind of goes around on his flaming chariot and is, surrounded by the beasts, these creatures that sound terrifying. And when it decides that his glory leaves the temple, he just rides right out, like the man with no name on his flaming chariot. Yeah, it's some great imagery. Okay, anybody? We done? Okay. All right, let us close with a word of prayer. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, we confess that at times we have not acknowledged or feared your dominion. We confess that we have feared men and loved their praises more than we have the honor of your holy name. We thank and praise you that you have been gracious and merciful to us, that you have given to us the same faith that you gave to your servant Daniel. We pray that we would be ever watchful for the confession of your name, that you would form us by your word, that you would teach us to live a life of holiness and prayer, that we would trust in you for all things, that we would flee to you in time of need, and that in all things you would be glorified. We pray that by your mercy we would always share in the kingdom of your Son, who you revealed to the prophet Daniel. And it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen. All right, thank you.